All right, hello everyone. Hopefully learning target 1 went well for you. Now we're moving on to learning target 2. This will be separated into 2 videos. The first one, we're going to be talking a lot about food chains, food webs, food pyramids. And then the second video, we'll be talking about like the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and stuff like that. So learning target 2, use mathematical representation to explain the flow of energy within an ecosystem. Learning target 1 was all learning about what an ecosystem was, the properties of an ecosystem, what makes it up. So now in learning target 2, we're going to talk about the flow of energy. Okay, so this is going to be talking a lot about different organisms eating other different organisms. Okay, so energy in an ecosystem, lots of vocab terms that we have to kind of cover here. And the first one that's going to be really important is our producers. Our producers are going to provide energy for other organisms, okay? And they do this by making their own food. They produce their own food. Another term for this is called autotrophs, okay? So again, they're making their own food. Auto means like autobiography. It means you, your own, you're doing it, okay? Making their own food. This can range anywhere from plants. Okay, we've got our trees, we've got our fruits, we've got even some fungi that can do this. Okay, anything that can make their own food. They do this by performing photosynthesis, so using the sun to make their own energy. And then some can also do this through chemosynthesis, so they actually use chemicals as energy to make their own food. And a lot of prokaryotes do that, okay, so single-celled organisms like bacteria. And so this picture, I believe, is from Yellowstone National Park. Okay, so producers are going to make their own food. Then we have our consumers. And so these are just organisms that are going to get their energy by eating others, okay, living or dead. We as humans, we need to get our energy from others. We can't just go stand out in the sun and get our energy that way. We are also called heterotrophs, okay, because we need others in order to provide us with energy. We're going to break down consumers a little more. Okay, so we have our herbivores, which you guys have probably heard of, only eat plants, like this rabbit here. We have our carnivores, which are, they just eat animals, so like our lions, they are just going to be eating animals. And then we have our omnivores, and so a lot of humans are omnivores because they are going to be eating both animals and plants. Okay, they eat a hamburger and they're also going to have a salad. We have our detrivores, which are going to be our scavengers. So they're going to eat dead stuff. Most commonly, we see these as vultures. And so maybe there's a deer that got hit by a car on the side of the road, and these vultures are going to clean that up. So they're going to eat that dead animal. And then we have these decomposers. And so these are detrivores. So they eat dead stuff. But they're going to play an extra special role. They're going to break down organic matter into simpler compounds, and they're going to put that back into the earth. So they're breaking down, the deer, and they're putting the carbon, the hydrogen, back into the earth, which is super cool. And worms are an example of a decomposer. Lots of vocab terms. Make sure you know the difference between detrivores and decomposers because, again, they kind of sound similar. So we're going to talk a lot about food chains and food webs. And so our food chain is going to be simple. It's just a model that shows a sequence of feeding relationships. So much like, just looking at a chain, right? It's just one linear chain with lots of hooks in it. This follows a connection between, again, a single chain of organisms, starting with a producer. So here's our producer in this example. Okay, and then it's going to have, one consumer eating that producer, and then maybe another consumer eating that. So for instance, this hawk eating that rabbit. So it's just a single line of a feeding relationship. Hey, I got a question for you here, so take a second and pause the video, but which way do the arrows point in a food chain and why? Hey, hopefully you pause that a little bit, give yourself some time to think. And so as you can see in these food chains, the arrows are actually pointing in the direction of energy flow. And so, for instance, this grasshopper is eating this sunflower. And so arrows are always going to go from what's being eaten to what is doing the eating, because this grasshopper is going to get energy from the plant. Okay, so the arrow is going to be from the thing being eaten to the one doing the eating. Okay, so same with this. This mouse is going to eat this grasshopper. So it goes from the grasshopper to the mouse. The mouse is getting energy from the grasshopper, so on and so forth. This is going to be really important when you're actually drawing out your food chains and your food webs. Okay, so food chains, I said, are really simple, and now we have our food webs. So these are going to be complex. Again, they're going to show our feeding relationships and our energy flow. The reason why we use food webs more often than food chains is because out in nature, organisms are going to have multiple feeding relationships. So as you can see, this hawk, it doesn't just eat this grasshopper, right? It's going to eat the spider, it's going to eat the mouse, it's going to eat the weasel. Okay, so out in nature, it's not normally a chain. It's going to be a big web of different things these animals can eat and be eaten by. Okay, so I want you to take some time and I want you to pause the video and in your notes, just draw a food web for me. Do your best. I'm going to show you the answer, but I really want you to try to pause and see if you can do this. And then I will show you the answer when you click play. So use these organisms, hit pause, draw your food web. Okay, hopefully you hit pause. Here's our answer here. We always start with our producers at the bottom. So here's my producers. I have my wildflowers and my grass. Then we have our consumers. Okay, normally they're called primary consumers. And then we have our secondary consumers up on the top here. Actually, this is going to be secondary consumer and that's tertiary. And we will learn about those words in a second here. But always start with our producers on the bottom. And as you can see, the mouse and the rabbit are going to eat the plants. The snake is going to eat the rabbit and the mouse. And then the hawk is going to eat the rabbit, the mouse, and the snake. However, this food web is forgetting something. The decomposer. Okay, so how would we put this into our food web? And so normally we put the decomposers below the plants, and that's because the decomposer is going to eat everything that ends up dying. So it's going to eat the wildflowers, the rabbit, the hawk, so on and so forth, because it's going to break them down and put those minerals, those elements back into the earth. So this is what your food web should look like. My suggestion, if it's not exactly like this one, like redraw it, okay? So you can have that as in your notes. Okay, so what I want you to do again is I want you to kind of just pause and I want you to answer these questions for me and then obviously click play and we can talk about them. So the first question asks, what's the only producer in this web? Okay, remember our producer is the stuff that gets sunlight and produces its own food. Hopefully you already got that. It's going to be the flowers down here. Okay, so our flowers are our only producers. What would the ladybug be considered? So our ladybug is right here. And so we know for sure it is a consumer, and then it's actually going to be a secondary consumer because as you can see, the bug is going to eat the plant. So the bug is the primary consumer, and then the ladybug will be the secondary consumer. And we're going to talk about this too. So if you're like, wait a second, we didn't learn about it, don't worry, we're going to get into it. And then what would the owl be considered? And so this is actually going to be a tertiary and a quaternary consumer because as you can see, it's going like first we have the bug, primary, and then we have secondary, and then we have tertiary, and then we have quaternary. Okay, but then we also, okay, here's our flowers. Grasshopper is primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay. All right, so now let's actually learn about what those meant. I wanted to kind of see if you already knew this, maybe you retained some stuff from seventh grade life science. So we'll move on and talk about that. So trophic levels. Trophic means energy. Let me write that. Energy. This shows the distribution of energy among our levels, okay? So our first level will always be our producers, okay? Then we have our primary consumers, our secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and quaternary consumers. Okay, so we're gonna look at that as we go through our food webs and then our pyramids as well. Okay, so clarification. So primary consumers are going to be herbivores that eat our producers. So this is like the bugs that only eat plants. Secondary consumers are carnivores that eat the herbivores. Okay, so lots of vocab terms. If you don't know these, you're going to be probably a little confused as I talk through this. So secondary consumers are going to be carnivores that eat herbivores, or those primary consumers. Tertiary consumers are carnivores that eat secondary consumers. And then omnivores, such as humans that can eat both plants and animals, may be listed at different levels. Okay, we might be a primary consumer as we eat plants. We might be a primary, and then a secondary consumer if we eat like a cow. Okay, so now we're going to go into our pyramids. And so our different pyramids, you guys probably have heard of this 10% rule. And so if you look at a pyramid, remember our producers are at the bottom. Then we have our primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So each time you move up the pyramid, up to 90% of energy is actually lost. So if you eat a plant, you only get 10% of that energy, which is kind of crazy to think about. So only 10% of the energy is going to be transferred from one level to the next. We call this the 10% rule. So for instance, in this pyramid, if we have 1,000 calories, okay, the plants have 1,000 calories. If these mole things eat the plant, they're only going to get 10% of that. So they're only going to get 100 calories. And then if these guys eat these guys, they're only going to get 10 calories. And then if the owl eats these guys, that owl's only going to get 1 calorie. Okay, so as we move up in the pyramid, how many calories you can get from the step below is significantly lower. It's only 10%. Okay, then we have our pyramid of biomass. So biomass is a measure of the total just dry mass of organisms in a given area. You're not going to see this one a lot. And so basically what it's talking about is we have way more producers, way more mass in our producers than we do in our tertiary consumers. Then we have our pyramid of numbers. So a vast number of producers are required to support even a few top-level consumers. So as you can see, maybe we have 5 million plants, but those 5 million plants can only sustain 5 tertiary consumers. Okay, so we need lots of producers to even sustain those tertiary consumers. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do now, and I know those were kind of long, so I'm going to have you go either onto Schoology or OneNote and do this worksheet. And so this is just a food web worksheet. It's just a front and back. If you do it on OneNote, make sure you go and at least open it on Schoology so you can get to the next item. And so basically, you're just going to see a bunch of food webs and you're just going to answer questions about it. So for instance, in this is actually the beginning of your worksheet here. So identify a food chain that consists of only a producer, a primary consumer, and a secondary consumer. So you're just picking one out. So you can maybe start, I'm going to start with the grass. So I've got grass, and then I need a primary consumer. I'm going to make that be a mouse. And then I need a second, oh, I put moose. Nope, that's a U. Okay, and then I need a secondary consumer. So should I, actually, any of those will be secondary consumers. Okay, so as you can see, our mouse gets eaten either by the fox, gets eaten by the hawk, or the owl. So you can put any of those animals. So I'm just going to put fox. And there you go. You have your food chain consisting of a producer, a primary consumer, and a secondary consumer. Okay, the next one, you're going to add in a tertiary consumer. So you got to find a path that gives you 4 different animals. All right, make sure to ask some questions if you have them. Good luck, and then I'll see you on the next video.